Life is full of unexpected twist stories. Like a movie, a true life story often pulls the rug out from under with a surprise plot twist. However, ridiculously contrived and unbelievable plot twists sometimes do happen in real life. The following cases started as mysteries, but wound up resolved by circumstances as crazy and unexpected. Number 5. Bobby Woorley was born in Fairmont, North Carolina. In 1963, he was charged with sexually assaulting a woman and was sentenced to 3 years at Sing Sing. Shortly after his release, Woorley changed his name to Bobby Wells and went to live with one of his brothers in the Bronx. In 1968, he got into a fight with his female neighbor and roughed up one of her kids. When the woman threatened to call the police, Woorley disappeared. This is the last time his family ever saw him, and he remained missing for 25 years. However, in 1993, the Woorley family got closure in the most unexpected way imaginable after the death of a famous drag queen named Dorian Corey. Dorian Corey was born Frederick Legg, a drag queen with a new identity after getting breast implants during the 1960s. Corey soon became a popular figure on the New York drag queen circuit and gained prominence after being featured in the documentary film Paris is Burning. In August of 1993, 3 years after the release of Paris is Burning, Corey died of complications, and her extensive costume collection was passed on to her friend and caregiver, Louise Taylor. As Taylor was sifting through the piles of clothing in Corey's apartment, she came upon a large trunk containing a mummified body with a gunshot wound to the head. A fingerprint check identified the body as Bobby Woorley, a man who had not been seen since 1968. Right around the same time, it's believed the body was thrown into the closet. Woorley had been shot in the back of the head and was believed to have disappeared for 20 to 25 years. The exact story of how Woorley's body wound up in the trunk is unknown, but before Woorley's disappearance, his brother remembered him mentioning a relationship with a transvestite named Dorian. The most logical theory is that Woorley had been abusing Corey and she had had enough. One night, after a particularly bad beating, she got her gun and shot him in the head. Corey's friends have confirmed that she did own a .22 caliber gun. She wrapped him up in layers of material because the NYPD would not have been friendly towards her and would have seen that she'd go to jail. So she took the secret to the grave and let it be unleashed after she was buried, leaving behind a mystery that would also serve as her legacy. Number 4. On June 12, 1976, neighbors of Blanche Kimball contacted the authorities as they'd not seen the 70-year-old, a resident of Augusta, Maine, for days. When police arrived at Kimball's home, they found the senior citizen lying passed away on the kitchen floor with serious injuries to her body. The investigation turned toward 27-year-old drifter Gary Robert Wilson, who had briefly lived in Kimball's home before the murder. Shortly thereafter, Wilson was caught breaking into another neighborhood home, but quickly skipped town. Since the prime suspect could not be found, Blanche Kimball's murder seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. In 2010, elderly vagrant Gary Robb got into a fight with a man on Capitol Hill in Seattle, which ended with Robb able to fight back using a knife and harm his opponent. No charges were filed because the victim could not be located, but the police turned Robb's knife into evidence and found a surprising discovery. DNA on the knife matched the blood from Blanche Kimball's murder in 1976. After learning from this development, the Maine State Police asked the Seattle PD to get a DNA sample from Robb to definitively tie him to the murder. They did so in a bizarre fashion. After finding Robb wandering the streets, an undercover police officer paid him to participate in a fake chewing gum survey, which involved Robb putting different flavors of gum into his mouth. The police saved the gum and used it to obtain his DNA. When the DNA linked him to the Kimball murder scene in October of 2012, Robb was arrested and charged with the crime. Gary Robb was actually Gary Robertson Wilson and had been in and out of prison since leaving Augusta in 1976. Number 3. On August 11, 1989, 29-year-old Victoria Vicki Cushman was found inside her apartment in Warwick, Rhode Island, bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher. Investigators found a letter written by Cushman to a local police officer named Jeffrey Scott Hornoff, demanding that he leave his wife and refused to accept his decision to end their affair. Police became suspicious of Hornoff when he denied having an extramarital affair with Cushman, but the suspicion died down once Hornoff's wife and friends confirmed he was at the party with them on the night of the murder. However, after facing much political pressure, the Rhode Island State Police decided in 1994 to charge Hornoff with Cushman's murder. At trial, the prosecution tore apart Hornoff's alibi by claiming he snuck away from the party to murder Cushman. Even though no other evidence connected Hornoff to the crime, Cushman's letter proved strong enough to secure a guilty verdict, and he received a life sentence. Hornoff maintained his innocence and filed numerous appeals, but had very little hope of overturning his sentence until an unbelievable turn of events in November of 2002. A 45-year-old carpenter named Todd Berry walked into the office of the Rhode Island Attorney General and flat out confessed to the murder of Victoria Cushman. According to Berry, he'd been involved in an affair with Cushman and killed her in a fit of rage. Berry had never been investigated as a suspect, but his conscience finally reached the point where he could no longer live with the idea of an innocent man serving time in prison for his crime. Berry eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 30-year sentence. Jeffrey Scott Hornoff was exonerated and released. Jeffrey Hornoff said of his experience, quote, "There were a lot of moments of bitterness while I was in prison, but I'm doing my best to leave the anger and the resentment at the door and not let it consume me. There are a lot of emotions going on. On one hand, I was happy for me and for my family, finally having this weight off of our shoulders and this shadow taken away. I felt a great deal of sadness for Vicki's family." Number 2. Sheila McDonald was a near-instant hit as a folk singer, but in 1972, right as her career was beginning to take off, McDonald suddenly disappeared. Not just from the spotlight, but everywhere. Even collaborators and friends had no idea where she had gone. If the internet had existed back then, rumors of McDonald being a time traveler or part of some elaborate conspiracy would have been a trending topic. But this being the early 70s, McDonald simply faded into bizarre historical footnotes. However, McDonald maintained a strong enough following that her albums were reissued on CD in the mid-2000s, thus spurring a cluster of wistful articles wondering where she had gone. One such article appeared in the Scottish Daily Mail, which found itself with an interesting postscript when Sheila McDonald showed up at their offices. McDonald explained the story behind her sudden disappearance: drugs. McDonald was at a party one night when she took pills that sent her on the worst trip imaginable, leaving her staggering through the streets of London, battling terrible hallucinations that lasted for weeks. It was so bad that she hopped on a plane back home to Scotland to reunite with her parents. McDonald found that the trip had ruined her singing voice. All she could get out was a strangled croak, like a muppet dying in a wind tunnel. McDonald's parents, who never wanted her to become a singer in the first place, convinced her to give up her music career, and she wound up marrying a failed academic and spending the next few decades living as a transient. McDonald and her husband were living in a tent when she saw the article about her in the Scottish Daily Mail. She was surprised that people were apparently still interested in her work after all these years, so she decided to resurface. McDonald also started music again. In 2013, she gave her first public musical performance since she had disappeared and was presumed to vanish from the world 4 decades earlier. Number 5. In 1998, 14-year-old Natasha Ryan vanished without explanation from her hometown of Rockhampton, Australia. 8 months after Ryan went missing, Rockhampton was rocked again by the disappearance of Kira Steinhardt. Several women had gone missing in Rockhampton. Ryan's disappearance was eventually linked to Leonard Fraser, also known as the Rockhampton Rapist, who was serving time in prison for the murder of Kira Steinhardt. In a secretly recorded conversation with a fellow inmate, Fraser confessed to the murders of 4 girls, one of whom was Natasha Ryan. Ryan's body was never found, but after being missing for 4 years and having a convicted killer confess to her murder, Nobody had any reason to doubt she was gone. Her family held a funeral for her, and Frazier stood trial for the murder in 2003. As it turns out though, Frazier wasn't being entirely truthful in his confession, which is another way of saying that Natasha Ryan might be alive. After receiving an anonymous tip, police raided the home of Ryan's boyfriend, Scott Black, 2.5 miles away from the house where Ryan's family lived. There, they found a very much alive girl hiding inside a wardrobe. Apparently, she'd been living at her boyfriend's home for half a decade just down the street from where she had been abducted, more than happy to let her family think she'd been abducted and killed by a serial rapist. While living there, she had to stay inside the home all the time. In 4.5 years, she'd never gone outside during the day. She would have to hide inside the wardrobe whenever visitors came around. Meanwhile, her boyfriend kept leading an active social life and apparently even dated Ryan's sister at one point. Ryan told police she couldn't leave because the lie had become too big. Since Black had lied under oath about his girlfriend's disappearance, he spent a year in jail for perjury, but the couple bounced back afterwards by selling their wedding photos to a magazine for $200,000. They're still together to this day, with a son and an entire family. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.